Okay, thanks, Doug. Doug is dying to know what this is a picture of.
I am.
And I wouldn't tell him. Does anyone know? Yeah, the party, Peter Sellers, right here. And this is actually a different kind of party. And because we're CHI, we're going to talk about personas. And so I invented personas. This is Maggie. She's a 35-year-old. She's a teacher. She hates her boss and wants a new job. So that's kind of her longer-term goal. Her shorter-term goal is she wants some new ideas about Thanksgiving to teach in her class. But she's also an artist. She dreams of supporting herself through her art, and she'd like to earn lots and lots of money through commissions. She's divorced and she has a child. And here's my next persona. This is Cheryl. She's a 53-year-old. She's the president of a college. She loves her job. One of her problems at work is there's no one on her level, so she has no one to talk to. She loves Netflix. She watches Mad Men. She probably has watched The Party many, many times. She wants to write movie reviews, and she's married. She's got 3 children and aging parents. And my last persona, here's Roger. He's 45 years old. He's laid off. He wants to start his own business. He has a basement beer brewing business, and he wants to figure out if he can earn money that way. He's a huge Red Sox fan, unfortunately. Lots of sports friends, wants to coach his kids' teams. He's married, he's got 2 kids, and a lot of gerbils. So here are my personas. And would anyone like to volunteer to actually be one of my personas? Melanie, which one would you like to be?
Oh, I'll be Maggie.
Okay. Will you come up here? Okay. And who would like to be Cheryl? Lauren? Okay. And who wants to be Roger? Bill. I was going to say, who wants to be Roger besides Bill? No, Bill. Bill, please come.
Nobody's got a Red Sox fan. This is going to be a stretch.
Okay. So now you're at a cocktail party. I was actually going to bring glasses for props, but I wasn't sure if Nicole would be happy with that. And a little bit of wine. Oh, do you have wine here?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought maybe it was against Sun rules. Well, so I lost Roger.
We'll play that too.
I just lost Roger. Okay, you guys are at a cocktail party you just met.
Here he comes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.
Salute. Yeah.
Okay, you're at a cocktail party you just met. Okay, Roger, introduce yourself to Cheryl.
Hello, Cheryl.
I forgot I was Cheryl. Cheryl, introduce yourself. Yes.
I think I saw your kids playing with my kids at the playground last Saturday. Do you have kids about this high?
I do, but my kids about this high are 35.
Lauren, you forgot your Cheryl. Well, I didn't give ages. Okay, Cheryl, meet Maggie.
Hi.
Hi,
I'm
how you
Cheryl.
doing? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Ah, I see that you're president of a college.
Yes, a university, actually.
Oh, I'm involved in it. I'm involved in education.
Oh, yes? What do you do?
Oh, I teach in the I teach in elementary school, but I have lots of views about what's wrong with education and what's wrong with the school I work at, and I'd love to hear more about your university.
Well, I'd like to hear more about how we can get your kids better prepared for our university. What do you think needs to be fixed?
Well, I think in the elementary schools, everybody has to be taught to the tests, and it really doesn't facilitate thinking and being innovative and energized, and they get tired of learning. It gets really boring, but then they get thrown into college, and they're supposed to be able to take care of learning on their own and have motivation. So I don't know what the students are like when they arrive at your college, but I mean your university, sorry.
Interesting. And so I see you're also an artist. What media do you work in?
Oh, I work in sculpture. I make things in marble and bronze. I aspire to be, take after Michelangelo. But
Okay, I'm gonna stop our cocktail party conversation, and I'm gonna thank everybody very much for their participation for now. Thank you. Okay, now, did we learn anything there? I mean, I developed my little personas, and it was actually very interesting because people introduced themselves in quite different ways. And people like Roger started trying to find a connection in a certain way based on children, and didn't bother trying to connect with Maggie. Maggie and Cheryl started connecting. First professionally, it sounded like maybe Maggie was even trying to figure out if there was a role for her in this university. And Cheryl was very happy to have somebody to talk about educational philosophy with, because she doesn't always get to in the university environment. So people connect in very, very different ways. And I'm sure all of us had little conversations outside there where we're all talking in different ways to each other. Social media is exactly the same. So one of the things that Web 2.0 brought is user-generated content, user collaboration, and a lot of that translates to a wealth of social media tools. And with these tools, the focus is not on technology, it's on relationships and on building relationships. And there can be a wide variety of relationships. And even in these little conversations, you can imagine if, in fact, Roger and Cheryl's children were at the playground, maybe they start arranging play dates. Or maybe Cheryl decides that Maggie has some potential and she wants to figure out if there's some kind of administrative role for her within her university. And what you need ultimately, if you're going to be using social media, or if you're going to be talking constructively at a cocktail party, is you need to have some kind of strategy. And the first step to the strategy is sort of defining it, learning what it is. And then the pieces to it are having a dialogue, figuring out how to make this happen, bringing in innovations, standing out for what you do. And that's what I'll be talking about. So one of the things that I find very, very surprising is that for all of the talk of social media and the incredible presence that social media has in many people's lives, that most people use social media in very passive ways. So this is a study from Forrester Research, and the number one activity by far is reading customer ratings and reviews. And who spends time doing that? Okay, so almost everybody here. And then, kind of as you go down, and some people do this as a pyramid, showing that the number of people on the top is very, very small. So, in fact, the number of people who look at YouTube videos is huge, and the number of people who submit YouTube videos is tiny. And there's a slightly larger number that review or rate the videos that are there. And the same is true if you look at many kinds of social media. So another way of looking at it, 69% of people are spectators, participating in video viewing, podcast listening, et cetera. But the number of people who are actually doing something actively is very, very small. Because I teach in a medical school, I look at a lot of social media use brought to healthcare, and people use this term e-patients, or talking about empowered healthcare consumers, and only 20%, which is really a very, very small number, have done one of the following. So if you think about, like for instance, has anybody ever used one of the sites for reviewing doctors? Have you found useful information in one of those? Yeah, I mean, I look at those, and there are a number that are out there, and you tend to find very little information there because very few people are contributing. You have to have someplace where a lot of people are contributing for you to have information that's meaningful. And that seems to be an area that is not all that commonly used at this point. Yeah?
Quick question. Going back to your population slide, is that adults or across age groups?
It's across age groups. And yeah, I didn't...
Teenagers through seniors?
I believe it's 18 and up. But, and I actually have a lot of slides that look at demographics just looking in healthcare. And it's almost even across all ages. And this is looking at 18 up. So it's, social media participation is very high. This is not something that's just being done by teenagers. You're welcome. So anyway, it's in, this is an area, I mean, it's very, very interesting that a lot of people are trying to promote people rating and reviewing doctors, hospitals, et cetera, and that doesn't seem to happen much, but it happens in a lot of other fields, like reviewing movies on Netflix or reviewing books on Amazon.com. There are other areas that people do. Even, have people seen rateyourprofessor.com? The first time somebody told me about it, I sort of, with my heart racing, I was actually thrilled that I wasn't there. And then I looked up all of my graduate school colleagues, and I did find a couple of them there, and some of them with very mixed reviews. And then I had the moral dilemma of, do you tell them or not? So, but it's, there are a lot of situations where the ratings and reviews don't matter, and there are ones that they do. So for instance, let's say you're on Amazon and you read a review and you decide to purchase a book just based on this review, and it turns out that the person has totally different views than you do. Or I'm sure everybody's read about some of these scandals where authors review their own books under pseudonyms and so on and so forth. So anyways, let's say the book is awful. You're out $12, you return the book, you say, okay, I'll just stick to the New York Times review of books from now on, whatever. It's not that big a deal. But let's say you make a decision to see a physician, or you're selecting a hospital based on a small number of anonymous reviews. It may actually matter who these people are, what these people say. The lack of context might actually be very important. So I think that's one of the reasons that there's so little of this going on. But this is, I think that this is particularly interesting because people do talk a lot about this notion of e-patients and how involved and connected they are, but not that heavily participatory still. So what is social media good for? Melanie?
Making announcements, keeping in touch with people, expanding your network, figuring out who's doing what, finding good articles, all that.
Great. Very, very good. Right. No, that's exactly what it's good for. And certainly, it's very nice when there's information that there's sort of a timeliness to, like breaking news. But it's also used for just filtering information. I saw somebody say on Twitter recently that Twitter is the new stumbled upon. And I thought, wow, it really is. because it just, it sort of gives you this way of finding some information that may be relevant from people that you know, and maybe you go and look at it if you have time, and maybe you don't. And also more and more, it's a conduit for consumer input. And there's been, like a lot of social media, like a lot of technological innovations, things often become commercialized. And so Twitter is an example where there have been a couple of companies that have gotten a lot of publicity for their use of Twitter. BostonCHI is not one of them. Does BostonCHI have a Twitter presence?
No, well, we do have Facebook and MySpace.
Okay,
Facebook.
I know I've seen Facebook. I didn't know it was on MySpace. And probably nobody has a hashtag and is tweeting my talk live, right? I don't think so. I'll talk about that in a minute if you don't know what hashtags are. But who knows? There are a couple of CEOs who are well known for their Twitter presence. Who knows? Zappos. Right, Zappos is probably the main one. And yeah?
The chairman of Whole Foods.
Of Whole Foods, yeah. Actually, he's gotten a lot of very mixed publicity, hasn't he? And Zappos, the CEO uses it. I've never actually read what he says. And they use it very, very heavily for customer service. I'll talk a little bit about public versus private use of social media, but just to give a Zappos example, my husband is on Twitter. He and I are swing dancers, as Adam will attest to, who's actually seen us dancing, though he didn't bother to say hi. And my husband will, he asked me if this was okay, because I tend not to say very personal things, but he asked me if it was okay for that he would occasionally tweet stuff about our dancing. And now he has this kind of reputation, and people who don't know him will say things like, oh, were you out dancing this weekend? But he actually said something about wearing his Jack Purcells. And somebody else tweeted him to say, where did you buy them? And he said they were from Zappos. And a customer service person from Zappos then tweeted to say, oh, thank you for buying them. And I was very impressed. Like, they're really on the ball. So that was a great example. And the more they do things like this, they're looking for people who have complaints and problems, but they're also looking for people who say nice things. Who has, I would argue, the most successful social media strategy in history? Person. Yeah, Obama. Yeah, and actually one of his social media strategists apparently just came out with a book about this. But yeah, very, very successful. And these technologies are all free. Facebook, Twitter, MySpace, LinkedIn, et cetera. They're all free. Certainly some of them have things that you can pay for, like LinkedIn has these sort of tiered levels of membership. But they really aren't free, because what do they take huge amounts of? Data. Time. And data, yes, both. But they take a huge amount of time. And part of it is you need to learn how to use them. You need to figure out how much to use them, how to measure their effectiveness, depending on what you're trying to do with them. If you're using them in a professional way, not a personal way. And even once you think you've mastered it, they have upgrades. You have to get used to the language, because it's a faux pas to talk about friends when you should be talking about followers. And they all have risks. And probably the biggest risk of all is that anything that's there is essentially there permanently. And you never know. I mean, there have been these well-publicized cases of college kids who've gone job hunting. But like I, for instance, follow lots of things having to do with smoking cessation and other sorts of health things. And I could, it's not that far-fetched to imagine that I would be applying for health insurance or life insurance, and somebody who did a small amount of research could say, oh, Lisa, you said that you're not a smoker. Why do you belong to 3 smoking cessation Facebook groups? And I mean, obviously I could explain it away, but
Or worse, they might not even ask. They just make a decision without even asking.
right. Like the person who doesn't get a job because they have pictures there and they're drunk. And I've actually seen that. I had a German exchange student who was staying with me for a couple of weeks, heavy Facebook user, went home and she published a bunch of pictures and tagged me. And I went and I looked at them and I thought, should I get her to untag me? Is that okay? Because it was a little bit more personal than I would normally have been publishing. So there's lots and lots of ways that huge amounts of information can get captured. And you can sort of be sitting with your BlackBerry tweeting something, and it can come back to haunt you in a totally different context a long time later. Actually, if I can digress for a minute, there was a scandal. This was, I'm trying to think, 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks ago. Did people hear about this? There was a woman who tweeted about her miscarriage. People didn't. I guess she's like sort of a well-known blogger, social media person, huge numbers of followers. And the way I found out about this is one of my former students works at ABC Health News, and she called me for a comment on this. So that was actually the first that I had heard about it. But she was in a boardroom and miscarried and then expressed joy over this. And I guess a lot of people reacted to this. And you can easily imagine, I mean, for instance, somebody who was undergoing infertility treatments, or somebody who had strong religious views, or on and on and on. I mean, it was sort of a fascinating example because she crossed so many lines in 140 characters. And apparently she did lose a lot of followers that way. And if she was looking for publicity, she certainly got a lot, because she was, this was picked up by a number of news stations, and I even got interviewed on the radio because of these quotes that I had in the ABC News article. So, and that's definitely something that could come back to haunt her. And you kind of try to imagine what was she thinking when she did that. But yeah, people tweet about all kinds of things. And you really need to think about, when you're using all these social media, you don't really just use it for the sake of using it, or using it because your friends are using it, or using it because Lisa says, why don't you try it out? But you really think about, what is the purpose of this, and then what are the metrics? And that ties back to strategy. So there's a lot of different metrics, and one of the things that's really fun about social media is that a lot of these metrics are totally apparent to you. So for instance, if you're in Twitter, the very obvious ones are, how many people do you follow, how many followers do you have, and how many tweets have you produced? And which of the ones do you think is the most important to most people? Followers, yes. So actually, my husband finds it very disturbing that I have more followers than he does. But and I don't really go and try to get them. But anyway, but I mean, you'll see people who have like 20,000 followers, and then I actually discovered one of the reasons that people get a lot of followers is they're people who have lists. And I forget what the site is called, but you can go into a list, and with one click, you can get everybody on that list. So it'll be a list about a specific topic. And so all of a sudden, you are following, 1,000 people who are interested in healthcare. And then a lot of people reciprocate, and they're going to follow you. So it's pretty easy, I think, to get large numbers of followers if you want to. But what does that mean? What does the number of tweets mean? I mean, it's saying something about how long you've been using it or how steadily you use it. The extent to which you're retweeted maybe is saying a little bit more. If I'm using language that you don't know, like retweet and stuff like that, I'll actually be showing some examples of it, but stop me and I'll define these terms. But it's really important to understand, what are you trying to do? So for instance, I use LinkedIn. LinkedIn also gives you a lot of metrics about, because you know how many people you're connected to, and that's reciprocal. So if you're connected to someone, they're connected to you, unlike followers. But so, is that saying something about your popularity? I don't know. I actually just submitted a proposal to somebody who found me in LinkedIn. And so I thought, well, that was interesting. Like, it really works. People use it in that kind of way. Lots of people use LinkedIn for job hunting. Lots of people use Twitter for job hunting. And I've heard of people, though I don't know anybody, who have found jobs that way. So in a lot of cases, those are the metrics that actually matter. But I'll show some other examples, and I'll talk about what are the metrics. So what's the most popular? This is actually data from a few months ago, and my guess is that it's probably pretty accurate. But Facebook, by a long shot, my understanding is that the biggest difference between Facebook and MySpace is that they're really, it's different demographics who are using them. Twitter's number 4, maybe growing since then. I was actually surprised LinkedIn is down at number 19, but I think it is still the biggest professional community. Yes?
What's this from? Where did you get this?
This is from Hitwise. Does it say that? It doesn't. No, this is Hitwise data. And the latest numbers that I saw are 44.5 million people on Twitter, though not necessarily active people, and 300 million active people on Facebook. And this is actually a report that I saw this morning that was talking about over half of US companies are saying that they've banned people from using social networking sites on the job. And then you kind of wonder about, what does this also mean about the company's online presence? Are they making a distinction between using this if the company has an online presence and you are the community manager, but you can't use it for personal use? And then how do they manage to block that? I think one of the best publicized cases of somebody who, of an organization that was blocking social networking use was the US Marines. Did people read about that? And they actually just recently, they were in the news that they reaffirmed it. And branding is very, very important, because if you're going to have a presence on these sites, you want to brand yourself in a way that you can be found, whether it's personally or whether it's as an organization. And this site, noam.com, somebody had sent this to me, and I actually thought the most fascinating thing about this, like, this is just a subset of the logos. The number of social media sites is just shocking. It's really astounding. And I looked at some of these because I thought, well, maybe these are social media sites with a couple of people, but like, you look at them, they all have thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people on them. But the thing that's great about this site is that if you want to have a presence as Lisa Gualtieri, you can type that in and you can find out where it's taken and where it's available. If you want to have a presence as Zappos, you can type that in and you can find out where it's taken. And in some cases, I think organizations will actually go and do that, and sort of they'll park their site. And there is a big problem with fraudulent use. And I mean, especially with companies, people trying to get it in much the same way people maybe still do with URLs. so that then, with the idea presumably that they would make a lot of money by selling the Facebook name or the LinkedIn name or whatever to the real organization. But anyways, it's fascinating, and even if you're not planning on using any of these sites at all, it's very interesting to go in and just type in your name and see what kind of presence there is, because even if you don't want to have a presence, there are probably people who are looking for you and are going to be coming across these Twitter sites, LinkedIn sites, et cetera, and thinking it might be you. So a lot of people talk about the big three as being Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And even though that isn't true according to that Hitwise data that I showed, I think that these are the most popular social media sites in the sense of the various kinds of personal and professional use that a lot of people have for them. And then the other two that I'm going to talk about a little bit, I'll talk about blogging and I'll talk about Google Alerts. This is data from Twitter, from ComScore, showing Twitter use. And there was this huge jump, and I think that some of the jump came from well-publicized people like Oprah, who I heard actually live tweeted on her show. So a lot of people who probably had never heard of it then knew about it, but also that gave, that just made it much more accessible to people. So there were probably a lot of people trying it at that point, although an awful lot of people who start Twitter accounts do not use their Twitter accounts. And even this is from Forrester Research, and this is showing a lot of people have heard of Twitter but have not used it, 76%. And it's kind of amazing that many people have heard of it. So it's just gotten a huge, huge amount of publicity. This is my Twitter page, and this is a screenshot I took probably just a couple of hours ago. So you can see, here I am, and you can see my large number of followers, which my husband is very upset about. Right, Mike? He's not going to publicly confess. Actually, it was really fun when I hit 1,000. I've been using Twitter, I think, for about 2 years. So, this was just this was not with particularly trying to use it. I also have a picture that's pretty clearly me. And one of the things I found myself really interested in as I was looking at people's Twitter pictures and Facebook pictures is even how do people represent themselves. And I see this probably more in Facebook than in Twitter, that a lot of people have pictures and they're very edgy and they're very cool. They're not just like blah pictures like that. And I think that people put a lot of effort and thought into how am I going to represent myself. Also in their names, that the advantage to using a name like this is that it's a lot easier for people to find you. But a lot of people have these, I don't know, I don't even know what to call them. I mean, these like cutesy little names and stuff like that. And it makes me think of AOL and I don't know, AIM and all these tools where you weren't supposed to just call yourself by your name. And anyway, so you do have to put some thought into how you're going to represent yourself. And some of that really has to do with the perception that you want people to have. In this case, I use it in not so much in a casual way, but it is part of my professional persona. But a lot of people use it in a very, very casual way. And probably a number of you know Jared Spool, who has presented here, lots of people nodding their heads. If you connect to Jared in Twitter, Jared does a lot of, I'm in the airport security line. The line is long. And if you want to find out what Jared had for dinner tonight, it's pretty easy. I tend not to say things like that. But you do have to think about what kind of information you want to provide about yourself. And it's fascinating the kinds of things that you can learn about people by looking at their Twitter pages or by looking at their Facebook pages, less so looking at their LinkedIn pages, which really doesn't allow a lot of room for creativity. So anyway, when you, so who uses Twitter? And keep your hand raised if you use it pretty seriously, like once a day. Keep your hand raised if you use it 10 times a day. To post. Okay, so nobody here is like a really heavy user. But
Doing your job. I'm sorry. If you're twittering and following these things 10 times a day.
people do.
Well, yeah, but usually part of their job somehow, some related. I mean, people I find twittering 10 times a day or more. They're trying to follow patterns.
I don't like about 115 minutes.
Actually, David, some people put a lot of time into composing their 140 characters, but yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it doesn't necessarily take that long to say something, especially if you're on your BlackBerry saying I'm in the airport security line. But on the other hand, a lot of people do use it as part of their professional presence, or people are tweeting for an organization.
Actually, is there any stats on that?
The extent to which people do one or the other, I haven't seen it actually divided. And it would probably be pretty hard to distinguish between, casual use, personal use versus professional use. So anyway, if you look at, this is an old screenshot. Okay, so you can get multiple views into it. So this, for instance, are my recent tweets. And you can see, this is probably a little bit more, I mean, I can go days and days without even looking at it. But sometimes, like I mentioned, it can be like stumbled upon, that it's a way that people are referring, oh, here's a great article. And I actually find that often what somebody says is a great article really is. And then sometimes what I'll do is I'll retweet it where you're just saying RT and you're saying the person's name. And that tends to be the kind of thing that can be reciprocal, like you retweet people and they retweet you, and it's just a way to have a greater presence. Lots and lots of people tweet. I don't think that Martha Stewart is one of the highest, has one of the highest number of followers. I'm not sure who does. I would imagine there's some celebrities who do, but okay.
Demi Moore's husband.
Story about Hannah Montana on the radio yesterday. She did a YouTube video saying she was quitting Twitter. And she had 2 million followers.
Well, 2 million followers makes my 1,300 look pretty paltry, but she probably doesn't. Excuse me?
Free now.
And does she follow all of them too?
I don't. She's quitting, so I don't know.
Okay,
She's
so
saying it so on YouTube to explain to her followers that she was still on the tweet.
right, because she's letting them down. Right. And like one of the things that I thought was actually interesting about this is that this was saying, I didn't actually check this for myself, but Martha tweets 4 times a day, and she has an assistant who posts for her, which is kind of interesting because, I mean, if you think about trying to do something on a pretty regular basis, and you want to keep your followers, and you want to sort of have interesting things on a pretty regular basis, having an assistant could actually be very, very helpful. I was giving a talk on Charles Darwin's 200th birthday, and I just happened to search, and it turns out there were 4 Charles Darwins listed, one of whom actually answers questions about Charles Darwin. There's been a lot of press about how Twitter's being used. It's being used by surgeons. There was a story about somebody who tweeted his vasectomy live. The wife of the co-founder of Twitter, I guess, when she was giving birth, apparently her husband tweeted it. So, there's a lot of, and then of course, the instance, the woman who was miscarrying that I mentioned before. It's kind of interesting looking at different kinds of organizations and how they use it, where Zappos is sort of very well known, and there's a lot of companies that are very well known for very proactive customer service. I was interested in Weight Watchers because one of my students was doing a case study on Weight Watchers, and they were looking at their website, their Facebook presence, and their Twitter presence. And their website is very active. There's a lot of very active use in their online community. They're updating the site with their professional content on a very regular basis. They're sending out newsletters. They're doing a lot that's very proactive. Their Facebook use is mediocre. I mean, they sort of have it. They put a little bit more effort into it. They have 3 tweets. They obviously, for the most part, follow anybody who follows them, but they really don't do anything at all with it. And I think that what they were probably doing was just grabbing the name so that somebody else didn't. And but it's kind of, I think it's actually very surprising, because given that they produce newsletters, it would be very easy for them to just take a couple of minutes and post here what is on the newsletters. And so you sort of wonder why they bother doing this and then not using it. Or they could hire a graduate student to do this for a couple of dollars a week, even just using the content from their website. So that, not that they would be doing something highly active, but it's, I think that that's kind of a surprising example. NIOSH, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, is in contrast, sharp contrast to Weight Watchers. They do an amazing job of they post on a lot of different health and safety topics. Some of it is their original content, some of it's content from other sources, some of it's retweeting from other sources, and really also this variety of topics. I interviewed the person who does their tweeting, and if you go, this is in eLearn magazine, and I actually have 7 steps to promote your organization in Twitter, sort of culled from Mark Senk, who's the guy who does this, who interestingly has his own Twitter account in addition, where he posts very different kinds of things than he does for NIOSH. And it was really interesting hearing his story about how he does this and why he does this. And he got motivated around the time of, remember the peanut butter recalls? And the FDA was doing a very good job of using Twitter to be providing up-to-date, accurate information about the recalls. And so that got him interested in it. His manager had been sort of, social media was on the radar. So when Mark asked, can I set up a Twitter account for NIOSH, he was told, go ahead and do this. This has grown perhaps beyond what he had realized it was going to be in terms of the amount of time he puts into it. And he's developed these very clever strategies, some of which I wrote about in the article, that he talks about laying bait and posting certain things and then seeing who picks up on it, who retweets it. He's also discovered that many of the people that he's writing posts for have shifts. So for instance, if he's talking about firefighters, that there are certain times of day that they will be reading and commenting back to him or retweeting. Other times of day, that seems to happen much less. And he has a wide variety of places that he gets his content from. He does it in a very professional way, but he did tell me that around the time I was interviewing him that there were murmurs of, we need guidelines and policies, and he was very scared about what this was going to mean. Was somebody going to pull the plug on it? Was somebody going to control what he was doing? His biggest fear was that when he had a tweet, that there were going to be 3 signatures needed before it could be posted, and therefore it was going to start to take multiple days, sort of, in the very standard corporate way. While I don't think that's happened yet, he does have a different background than he used to have, so something must have happened to say, you need to be very carefully branded with CDC, and you need this and you need that. But and while he doesn't have his name there, that's also something that's very interesting, because he does have a kind of hands-on personal touch to this. And it is interesting that his name isn't there. And when you look at a lot of sites that are with a corporate presence, you'll see that there's no name there. And so it does give you much more of an anonymous sense. Like if you want to say something back to them, you kind of feel like, well, is somebody really going to read this? Or who is this going to? So anyways, these were the best practices that I took from Mark's pretty extensive experience using NIOSH. And anyways, my slides are going to be available. I think Doug is going to post them on the BostonCHI website. But and none of this is it's all, I think, pretty obvious, but it's just, a lot of this has to do with the nature of it. Like, for instance, pacing your tweets. Like, he found that if he tweeted too often, that people would block him. And so, he really kind of, and I actually counted one day, this sounds really awful, doesn't it? But one day I looked at, like his last 40 posts, and he kind of averaged about 10 a day. And he had one day that maybe he jumped up to 15, a couple of days where there were just a few. But, it was definitely all within this range. Twitter, I think, has produced more tools, and it's kind of amazing the number of things that have sprung up from this. I think Quitter is one of the most fascinating. I think it's an adorable name, and I don't think it's been very successful, but I think that it was a really interesting idea to do this, and there have been some smoking cessation programs that have used Twitter, but perhaps done it in a slightly more effective way. And that also brings you back to metrics, that it's not just doing something, but it's doing something in a way that works. And I'll give a Facebook example, too. I mentioned hashtags before. I thought about setting up a hashtag for tonight, but that would have meant people having laptops or Blackberries or iPhones or something, and then sort of live tweeting it. But I've been to conferences where they have a hashtag set up. So basically a unique identifier for the conference. And people will live tweet it. And in 2 cases, conferences I've been to, they actually had screens. So like there was the presenter screen, and then there was another screen where they were showing the stream. As a participant, I find it's a little bit distracting, because you'll sometimes look up and see that, or even if you're looking on your laptop, you'll look and you'll see that, and I don't know, it's and there's a voyeuristic sense to it as well, that like what is going on in Ron's mind right now, and doesn't everybody want to know? And if he was tweeting it, we would know. I did give a talk at a conference last month that was one of the 2 where they were showing the live tweets. And it was very exciting when I sat down and saw somebody had tweeted, Lisa gave a great presentation. And then, a couple people retweeted it. So, it's kind of fun, but it's also, I think it's one of those things that has advantages and has disadvantages. And I wouldn't imagine it's highly useful for the people who aren't at the conference to be following that Twitter stream, which they can, because I think so much of the context is missing. TweetDeck is probably one of the best known tools, and it has the advantage, yes?
I was just wondering where the previous list came from, because that was on the website.
Yeah, it's hashtag.org. Yeah, and I believe you can just go there and you can set up a hashtag for anything that you want. The advantage that TweetDeck and some of the other tools that like this have is that you find that once you get more than a couple of followers, if people are tweeting pretty actively, then there's just this huge amount of information there. And you sort of look at it and then you think, oh, should I keep scrolling down and see what else people said? And this just gives you an easy ability to set up columns. So if you have one or two people who you follow, maybe you have people in your discipline or sub-discipline that you follow, you can just set up columns for it and then kind of ignore the rest of people there. There's also, like I said, there's just huge numbers of tools, and this website actually has a lot of the tools listed. And I had seen that site, and then I went and I tried one of them out. So Twitter Grader, I don't know what their algorithm is, but I was very happy to have a 98 out of 100. But you know, it's almost shocking how many tools there are around Twitter. Twitter etiquette, it's kind of like a cocktail party where you can talk to anyone, but they might not talk back. So unlike our little staged drama before, you know, people were you say something to somebody and somebody says something back. In Twitter, that doesn't necessarily happen. Very easy to join, and I think that there's a lot of benefits to it, and I think the biggest drawback is the time, the amount of noise, the amount of sort of irrelevant things, and certainly the best advice that I can give if you want to try it, or if you're using it and you want to kind of increase your use, is to observe what other people are doing, to listen. So if we go back to our personas, Maggie, how can you use Twitter?
Well, I can think about some of the topics I discussed in the cocktail party and see if I can do a search and find who's talking about those kinds of things. If I'm looking for a new job, I can post something about that. And also, the same with departments.
Right, and you can also think about, how, right, what kind of persona do you want to have there, and what kind of use do you want to have? I know Cheryl had to leave. Nicole, will you step in and be Cheryl for a minute?
Sure.
Okay, so you're the university president.
Yeah, she could find out a lot about her students.
Maybe more than she wants to know.
She could have conversations with other movie lovers,
Yep.
things like that. My guess is as a college president, she probably want to keep it pretty professional and may not want to do anything too personal.
Yeah, and also, remember I said she's kind of lonely at the top? So this might be a way that she can talk to other people in similar positions. And one other thing.
Pretend that she's not in that position.
Right.
Talk to people who are right next door.
Exactly. Exactly, because you can create any kind of persona you want, and people don't usually really know. The other thing that she might want to think about is setting up a Twitter presence for her university as a way of attracting new students. Okay, and do we want to have a different Roger? No offense, Bill, since you. But just to give Ron?
Well, obviously I'm going to be looking for jobs. Tapping the Red Sox fan base for the beer that I was brewing in the basement. And only while the children are asleep, though. How to get rid of the gerbils.
Or since you're interested in becoming an entrepreneur, you might find some other small business owners. You might want to talk about how to get started.
Yeah, that would be a good thing to do in general anyway, because when you're an entrepreneur, you're by yourself by definition. Connecting with others would be a good thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, so you can see people can do this in professional ways, in personal ways. Yes, Bill?
Well, using Roger as an example, he might want to, like, Twitter things about, coaching kids, and he might want to Twitter things about growing beer, but he might not want the same audience for the same.
Right.
I mean, so if someone is a follower of Rogers, does that mean they're going to get everything, or does he have to set up two different personas, or how do you handle your multiple topics?
Yeah, that's a really good point. If he has very different things that he does, he might actually want to set up different ones. Just like Cheryl might want to have her professional persona, but maybe she wants her movie review persona separate, and certainly her university presence as something very separate and professionally branded. And similarly with this. Or maybe Maggie wants to look for dates. So she might want to have a very different persona because she doesn't want that to get mixed into her job hunting persona. So so sometimes you really do need to think that through. Okay, I'm going to just talk quickly about Facebook. Who has a Facebook page? Wow, who doesn't have a Facebook page? So just a few people, okay. And who, so if you have a Facebook page and you use it pretty actively, like you look at it at least once a day. Wow, it's a lot of people. Okay, and some people are still thinking about how often they look at it. Okay, so Facebook has a lot of capabilities. I'm not going to go into detail about most of the capabilities, but I am going to show you. Do you all recognize this person? And Russ and I recently connected on Facebook, and one of the things that's fascinating is you start to learn stuff about people in all of these social media sites. So if you go into Twitter, and if you're connecting to somebody, you might find out things about what a person likes, what a person's interested in. You might find out that, especially if people don't separate their personas, you might find out about, with somebody you know professionally, you might find out about their hobbies as well. So for instance, I ran into Russ recently at Bertucci's. He was sitting at the table behind me. It was his anniversary. So I came in and I wished him a happy anniversary. I met his wife for the first time. And you know how you just meet somebody really quickly, and 5 minutes later I couldn't remember her first name. Now I know her name. It turns out we have friends in common. Most of these are BostonCHI friends. But you can look, once you're connected to somebody, you can actually see all kinds of things about them. Russ was afraid, he agreed, this was with his permission, but he was afraid I was going to embarrass him. This is Alan Dix, who's in the UK. Does anybody know Alan? He's pretty, he's a very prolific writer, CHI person, written books. He's always giving talks at CHI and other conferences. Alan, when I saw this picture of Alan, I thought, like, wow, he looks like a biker or something. I mean, so it's kind of interesting. Remember I mentioned, like, I have this, very bland picture. Some people have very different kinds of pictures. I don't know what that says about him. Some people let you know exactly how old they are. Some people just let you know their birthday. Some people don't let you know even that. Like Russ didn't have his birthday listed, and so I still don't know how old Russ is. Although I do know how many years he's been married for because he told me at Bertucci's.
Same number.
But, it's fascinating. You do learn about different sides of people. Weight Watchers, as I mentioned, it's very easy to set up groups, and you can friend or become a fan of a group. So Weight Watchers has a presence like this. But, you can also imagine, like these kinds of health applications that I'm interested in, you can imagine that there's some that people might be very hesitant to be involved in because it's connected to you. And the people who you are connected to can find out what you're fans of. So Lancome has a Facebook page, and if I become a fan, then all of a sudden everybody's going to know where my mascara came from. So the reason I know how easy it is to set up groups, one of my students, this was a course I taught in the summer, one of my students set up a group, and it turns out that people friend it. It's not completely clear to me what it really meant that somebody friended our group. It didn't mean that they were going to take the class, but I could send out messages and people would get the messages. The New York City Health Department, actually with a pretty hefty budget to a PR firm, has this smoking cessation site, and they talk with enormous pride about the 3,205 fans that they have. And I asked them, well, how does this translate in terms of smoking cessation? And they said, we don't track this, and it's not what we're paid for. So, you do have to think about what are the metrics, and there are ones that are very easy to measure, but there are ones that are very hard. So Facebook, I don't need to talk about joining Facebook since almost everyone in the room has joined. Let me talk, the last one I'm going to talk about is LinkedIn. And so I have a LinkedIn presence, and this is 37 million members is probably a little bit low. It's probably up a little bit. And they keep on adding features. They add new search features. You can recommend people. You can have groups. And then also they have a tiered membership so that it's free. But then if you want certain additional capabilities, you have to pay a monthly fee. It has lots of groups. And if you join a group, you can choose whether you want the logo to be on your page, so whether people are going to know that you're part of this or not. And you can also control how often you get email updates. I did look, by the way, since I was on this Weight Watchers social media case study kick, and it turns out that they had a group that was started by a member, and it says so explicitly. The American Medical Association has a presence. There are lots of organizations that have a presence, but it's not always an official presence. I think they set it up as a little bit of a pyramid scheme. So like it tries to grab your address book and send out, welcome everybody. Every time I go into LinkedIn, it's always saying, oh, here are some people that you may want to connect to. And the one thing I have not figured out how they do this is that when somebody I know who just joined LinkedIn, it will tell me so-and-so has just joined LinkedIn, and it is somebody I know. So how did they know that I knew that person? I mean, you sort of feel like they have my address book even though I didn't give it to them. I don't know, it's, not to sound paranoid, but
It seems to be company-based, so somebody new from a company that you're joins, now they've got you work this company, they were at that company.
right, right. No, that part I've figured out, but they're like actually I live in Lexington, and one of the deans from Lexington High School just joined LinkedIn, and he came up in my list, and that was really weird because, no. So I couldn't figure that out. And there was one other one that, again, it just completely perplexed me as to why they were notifying me that he had just joined. Yes?
I have a theory that it's actually like they were looking at your profile because there's only one person on my Facebook that recommended to me that I know who that person is, and it's only because they bought a account from her like 2 years ago. We have no mutual friends, not even a mutual city, no mutual school, no mutual anything, except for that I bought a account from her. So I have like a European book. They did that. I'm assuming that she looked at my profile to make sure it was like the same person before she sold me the car. But this is like the Craigslist.
Oh, right. So that might be an instance where you actually would be searching, and the fact that you're online already with Craigslist maybe increases the likelihood that you would look for other information about people, which again, goes to my point. You do have to be careful what you say because anybody can find this out. So joining LinkedIn, again, very, very easy. Who has a LinkedIn presence? Wow. And I think that the one thing about LinkedIn, perhaps more so than the other social media tools I've talked about, is that I think you do need to put a lot of time into creating your profile and updating your profile, which I certainly don't update my profile as often as I should. And actually, I know somebody who says that she updates her profile on a very regular basis. And the reason that she does that is because people get these weekly newsletters about updates, and she's always in it because she's making these small changes. So very quickly, I just want to talk about blogging because I think blogging is a fantastic way of having an online presence and also ties into the other kinds of social media because people tweet your new blog post and you can comment. Mine isn't set up that way, but you can comment and have the comments automatically go into Twitter. I mean, there's sort of a lot there in terms of that. But I think that if you like to write more than 140 characters at a time, blogging is a great way to have a presence. And so, for instance, Roger could easily set up a blog about beer brewing. And probably a lot of people are going to be searching and connecting with him that way. Similarly, Maggie could do the same thing about some of her educational interests. And it's easy and it's fun. And if you like to write, it's great. And if you don't like to write, then it's probably a good way to get a lot of practice at it. Yes?
Did you build this in Blogger or WordPress?
This is in WordPress. Yeah, and actually I've seen people who have the exact same background, and it's pretty easy. It's pretty easy to set up. So unlike most people, I actually have multiple blogs, and this is kind of my way of keeping my different personas separate because I do healthcare work and I also do online education work, which is not as different as it sounds. But so I have a separate blog, and this is in TypePad, which I don't like. I like WordPress much better, but this is part of ACM, and I had no choice about it. And I actually helped one of the programs at Tufts start a program blog that is contributed by students, alumni, and faculty, and I occasionally write a guest post for it. And I think this is yet another software package that they're using. And they actually have gotten a pretty wide readership for this. So it's, if you think about different ways of promoting a program, so for instance, if Cheryl wants to promote her university, having a blog like this, I've actually seen some universities that have done things like this, and it can be a really nice way of drawing people in and letting them see multiple perspectives. This is actually, you can see this is the same WordPress template. This is something I set up for my class. And again, just very, very easy to manipulate it, and the nicest thing about it is you get these incredible stats. So I was talking about metrics, and a number of people blogged my course announcement, and when these were well-known people or heavily read blogs, or if people tweeted it and so on, I could see, somebody would say something and my stats would go up. So that was really interesting to see. You can get huge numbers of metrics. You can find out what links people clicked on, the search terms people used, huge amounts of information. But again, this is an instance where you really need to think about what are the metrics that matter. And the only one that ultimately really mattered is how many people enrolled for the class. But it was still very interesting as a social marketing experiment to be able to monitor all of this. And the last thing I want to mention is Google Alerts. Who uses Google Alerts? Who Googles themselves? I think everybody does at some point, because you just want to see what people are going to find out about you. But Google Alerts is a really nice way to see if somebody else is talking about you. And very, very easy to set up. So I was going to do another exercise with my personas, but I think what I'll do is just kind of conclude right now. And I'm not going to talk about a recommendation for having a professional presence in LinkedIn, since everybody already does. But from the perspective of the organization that you work for, your own consultancy, it's one of the things that's really important to do is to be strategic about it. And especially because all of these technologies take time to use. So you don't want to just like, oh, everybody's using Twitter, I better have a Twitter presence. Or I'm going to set up a Facebook group, and then you can ban me. But to really think about which ones are going to be effective, how to use them. Doing a competitive analysis is very important, because it's a great way of seeing what similar types of organizations are doing, and then borrowing their models and applying it to your own. And definitely prioritizing and thinking about, even if you're going to be using multiple technologies, think about which are the ones that are most important. How frequently do you want to update them? What are the roles that are necessary in doing this? So for instance, the blog that I showed from Tufts, there is a community manager who I trained, who is paid as a work-study student a certain number of hours a week, and she spends this time sending out a monthly newsletter, asking people to write something for the blog, reminding them that they committed to write something for the blog, et cetera, et cetera. And if you don't do this, I'm sure everybody's had the experience that you go to a blog or a Twitter page or whatever, and there's 3 entries, and the last one was a year and a half ago, and you immediately leave. You don't even bother reading what's there. So if you're going to do this, it's really important to think about that. And then once you get going with something, to stop and to say, in 1 month, I'm going to assess, was this valuable? Is this drawing people in? Is this having any impact? Do I need to change my strategy? Maybe I want to stop using this particular social media technology. So the ultimate challenge is not to focus on the technology, but to focus on the relationships and to understand where people are, what they're doing online, to be participatory. I think the worst sites on most of these are the ones that it's just another website, it's another presence, it's more brochureware. But the ones that are very active, and that's one of the reasons that I thought NIASH was such a good example, because it's not just sending out their messages. And one of the things with the 140 characters is that a lot of people have the shortened URLs, but the problem with the shortened URLs is you don't know what it's going to, there's no indication of what it's going to be until you click on it. And I've seen lots of examples of people who all they tweet is their own site, their own message over and over and over again, which is really counter to the whole notion of social media. But even though it's about relationships, it's still important to keep up with the technology and to think creatively about how to use it, and to also know that the way people use technology evolves over time, and you want to stay somewhat consistent to what other people are doing. And you see, like I get people who are connecting to me in Twitter, and this is a great example. Here's somebody, it's not them. You look at the name, I don't know who this is. I'm just not even going to bother clicking on it to see who it is. So if you want people to follow you, you really have to think about what's going to entice them. And unless I was an animal lover, this is probably not something I'm going to click on. So these are small details, but they can make a huge difference. Also, I'm sure it's become so ubiquitous now that you see the follow me on Twitter, fan me on Facebook. But I think it's still important to do, and I see more and more people who include this in their signature to just make it as easy as possible for somebody to follow with one click, that they don't have to go and search for you if they want to see if you have a presence. And I will say that if you want to connect to me on any of these, I will connect back to you. And this also gives you a way to reach me. And as I said before, my slides will be available. And at this point, I'd be happy to take questions. Yes?
I was wondering if you could talk some more on the social aspects of LinkedIn. Because I think LinkedIn is my online resume. It's great to be able to connect after, and I personally like emails that you get from clients. But that, I hear people using it in other ways. But that sometimes, kind of thinking of a persona as a social object, it seems a little bit more limited than what you might have as social objects in MySpace or Facebook. And I'm sure I'm missing some aspect of LinkedIn in terms of being a social, more of a social media. But speak on that.
Well, I think the ways that it becomes the most social are when people connect around organizations. So, for instance, it almost has the ability to displace these other ways that people can connect, like the alumni associations. There's so many alumni associations. There's, if you put down all of your past jobs, it turns out, especially for a lot of organizations that are no longer around or ones that have had massive layoffs, there are people connecting around those organizations. So I think that that's probably the biggest social part, where you don't necessarily have a professional connection with these people, but you went to school together or you used to work for the same company. And I find that, like I used to work for EDS, and actually I just got an email the other day that they changed the name from past and present EDS employees, since EDS no longer exists, it's part of HP. It's now called EDS alumni. And I do every now and then get people connecting to me from that who I, in some cases, used to work with, and in some cases I never heard of before, but we have that shared bond. So I think that's the kind of thing that you're talking about, that it's just sort of another way of connecting with people who you may have very, very loose ties with. Yeah.
Just to add, another great way is looking in, because you can see where people who work in the company
Yeah, I actually find that LinkedIn is a great way for searching for people, and I have found very, very good guest speakers for my courses where I had a specific idea, like I wanted somebody from WebMD, and if I just try the Contact Us page, I'm never going to find somebody. But if I go through that, I can try to connect to somebody, send someone a message, and 9 times out of 10 I get a response. So I
think what you're saying makes a lot of sense, because I've been looking at groups in that way, because, for instance, like Meetup.com is not technically a social media site, but that, in terms of a social object, also, that's the aspect I was missing from LinkedIn, and I hadn't really thought about it.
Yeah, I think they make it very, very easy for you to search for people. Yes.
Yeah, the groups aspect, you just mentioned the groups aspect. That's a really big social interaction as well, because I'm in the learning field also, and I'm in several of the learning groups there, and people will just post random questions about, which learning management system should I look at, or what should I be concerned about, and they'll get, 20 or 30 people answering the questions and sharing their ideas and experiences. So it's a lot of social interaction from that respect.
Yeah, I think people feel, kind of a commitment because it feels like it's sort of a small, closed group, even though some of the groups actually become quite large. And people do seem to be very willing to share their expertise. And of course, it can be self-serving because it's yet another way to get your name and your affiliation out there, and maybe you end up with some consulting or, who knows what as a result of answering people's questions. So I do think that's I think that's something that happens quite a bit. Melanie.
Well, thinking about the evolution of social media going all the way back to Usenet, people hear me? Usenet and listservs, and it was like we built a sort of distributed network and did a lot of thinking. And if you leapfrog to think about what Twitter is and the whole concept of micro-blogging and the immediacy of it, and it hasn't really caught on. I mean, there's the concept, but the dynamic of what the future may bring with this kind of social networking, this instantaneous, we haven't really understood. I mean, the LinkedIn and the Facebook, they're all evolution of this more thoughtful way of connecting. And I wonder if you comment on any thought you have about the dynamics of Twitter in terms of the internet.
Well, interestingly, I think the historical perspective is sometimes a fascinating one. Does anybody remember IRC, Internet Relay Chat? For the first time, I joined a scheduled chat on Twitter, and it was using a hashtag, and that was how you sort of saw the conversation unfolding. And it was exactly like IRC, and I actually said that to somebody, and a couple of people agreed with me. But yeah, it's just a nicer interface to it. But that's a great point. Yeah, I don't think most of this isn't so new and revolutionary. We just have smaller, faster, prettier devices for.
It will change the whole dynamic. I mean, the New York Times had this recent article about people flaming using Twitter. And can you speak up a little bit? Well, the New York Times, I think last week had an article about people flaming because they think Twitter, there's that anonymity, but the ease and the fastness of it, and they were flaming at each other, and they were public or celebrity figures and whatnot. So, what are going to be the dynamics as this gets more popular and gets used more? So it just.
Yeah. Yes.
Probably last question, and we'll continue conversation on that.
Okay, thanks, Doug.
I was just wondering if you think Twitter names will sort of go the way of domain names, where you have to buy them, because it seems like I could just grab some company name and start tweeting about them, and sabotage them if I wanted to. Even if this is already being done.
Well, I think it's one of the reasons why it's actually interesting to go and to use that site that I showed and to see for a particular name what kind of presence does it have. Because, if you you want to have a presence for your business and somebody else has it, and you've already been branded that way, you might be quite happy to spend some money to buy that away from them. So it's very easy to imagine auctions happening in much the same way they do with URLs or yeah, although as the use grows, it'll be harder and harder for them to do it. Yeah. Well, thank you very much.